The 2026 Formula One season is almost upon us, and with that comes a set of completely new regulations. You may be aware of some of the changes, such as DRS no longer being with us, but here I'll be going through what the changes are trying to achieve and whether I believe that the FIA are moving in the right direction. But first, let's talk about what went wrong with the old regulations. For the last 4 years, we've been in the ground effect era. These cars were large and bulky compared to anything F1 had seen before. This made overtaking particularly difficult around certain street circuits like Monaco, making for incredibly boring races where the qualifying positions determine the final order of the race, which isn't great if you're trying to hype up the importance of a race day. They even resorted to adding a mandatory 2 pit stop strategy to Monaco to add some variance and strategy to the race, but it didn't really work. These cars also generated the majority of their downforce with the aerodynamic design of the underside of the car. This, however, led to 2 main issues. The first is the fact that they created a lot of turbulent air behind the car, which is more commonly referred to as dirty air. This made it hard for cars to follow close to each other, as the dirty air wouldn't allow their aero features to work as effectively as they do in the clean air. Not only did this make it more difficult to overtake, but it also meant that the following car would overheat its tyres and wear them out while trying to keep up. Often this would mean drivers would have to back off from the car in front to preserve their tyres. It also meant that the driver who was in the lead and had the clean air would increase their lead massively and drive off into the sunset, resulting in a rather boring race at the front. The other issue encountered with the ground effect was the need to run cars at an extremely low ride height to allow the underside of the car to do its job of providing the downforce and sucking it down onto the road. This could, however, lead to a very uncomfortable ride on certain circuits if the conditions weren't perfect, as it would rapidly vibrate and bump in a way that became known as porpoising. This wasn't only frustrating and uncomfortable for drivers, but it also led to drivers complaining of back pain after races, as well as making the car slower and difficult to handle. To combat the issues with the difficulty of overtaking, the drag reduction system, commonly known as DRS, was a feature that allowed drivers to open a flap in their rear wing at certain points of the circuit. This would allow a car to have less downforce on some straight parts of the track, which meant it can travel at more speed. This was only available for cars that were less than a second behind another car, hence why it's a tool specifically for overtaking. While on some tracks this helped, on a lot of narrower street circuits it still wasn't enough to allow for exciting overtakes. On these street circuits, it also led to situations known as DRS trains. This is where a long chain of cars would form, typically in the mid-pack. This is because the front car wouldn't have any DRS advantage, but all the cars following in the chain would have it. This essentially leads to a situation where no one can overtake. It also meant in some situations, cars could slow down deliberately to back up the rest of the pack. Despite going much slower than they would usually, cars still wouldn't be able to overtake them. This was often used for certain pit stop strategies, where the DRS leader could back up the pack so their teammate could stay in front after their pit stop. So now we've looked at the issues with the previous regulations, let's look at the new ones for 2026 and see if the FIA have managed to solve any. But before we do, it would be great if you could subscribe. I've only just created this channel, so it would be a massive help if you do. Anyway, back to the new regulations. The first change is to the size of the cars. They're now smaller and lighter, which in theory should lead to more exciting racing as they'll be more agile and able to overtake in tighter corners. Despite this change, however, the cars are still much larger and heavier than they were in the early to mid 2000s, so only time will tell if the change is enough for more entertaining racing for both the viewers and the drivers. The next notable change is to the power units. The previous PUs were hybrid V6 turbo engines with about 20% of their power coming from an electrical system. Now, the FIA have decided to go down the eco route, making it a requirement for the power units in 2026 to have around a 50-50 split between the internal combustion engine and electric power. I'm no expert on engines, but I would imagine that the new ones will provide more torque due to the increase in electric power, which will lead to faster acceleration. The increased reliance on electric power also means the drivers will have to conserve and charge their battery more than they did previously in order to have the most power on the straights. The battery charges when the drivers brake for corners, but in recent testing, Max Verstappen has demonstrated a specific downshifting technique to most effectively charge the battery. I'll get on to whether this is a good thing or not later in the video. My overall issue with this power unit change is that it feels like it's becoming a bit more like Formula E. While there's nothing wrong with Formula E, it seems strange to have two top-tier motorsports that are that similar. In my opinion, Formula 1 should be set apart from the rest. Many fans miss the sound of the old V8 or V10 engines, and I must admit, I doubt the sound of the new power units will come close to what we've heard in the past. From a competitive standpoint, I don't necessarily think that this will be a bad thing though, apart from the fact that the field will be quite spread out as it always is with a new regulation change. Although, that being said, it might be spread out even more than normal due to teams like Red Bull building their own power units for the first time with Ford, and rumours that the Mercedes PU has used a loophole to produce more power. Another slight change from 2026 is the shift from DRS to overtake mode. While DRS would reduce drag to increase speed on a straight, the new overtake mode will allow drivers to use more electrical power if within 1 second of the car in front. Essentially, both DRS and overtake mode are trying to achieve the same results in different ways. The main reason for this change is that now they've introduced active aerodynamics, which will work in a very similar way to how DRS did. These have been dubbed as Z mode and X mode. Z mode is the default mode used when cornering and will provide the maximum amount of downforce. X mode is designed to be used on the straights, and it allows the driver to be able to open flaps on the front and back wing to increase top speed. Where this differs to DRS though, is that it can be used whether ahead or behind another car. I like this change as it allows for more driver skill expression and should separate the better drivers from the weaker ones. The overall amount of downforce for the 2026 cars will be reduced by about 30% from last year, as the floors have been simplified and made flatter to reduce the ground effect, and the ride height has been raised. So while they'll probably be slower around the track than before, they'll probably take more skill to drive due to the reduced grip in the corners. In theory, this will also reduce the amount of dirty air that the cars produce, which will make following other cars and overtaking easier. Although, that being said, certain drivers have been saying during testing that this isn't necessarily the case. The lower downforce will mean, however, that they'll be faster in a straight line, which should lead to more overtaking opportunities. Now we've looked at all the changes, is it actually a step forwards, or are we straying further from the pinnacle of the motorsport we all love? In conclusion, I believe that making the cars smaller and lighter, along with the active aerodynamics, will lead to more exciting races and encourage more overtaking. It may take a couple of seasons to play out like this, however, as the gap may be too big between the teams with the Mercedes power unit and the others. Although there are 4 teams using the Mercedes engine, and you can never write off Aston Martin now they have Adrian Newey designing their car. You can also never write off Max Verstappen, as he is great at adapting to new cars, and the increase in potential skill expression will definitely favour him. I'm not fully convinced with the new 50-50 hybrid engines and hope that they revert all the way back to the V10s in 2030, while also making the cars even smaller and lighter like they were in the 2000s. I feel that the increased reliance on needing to conserve the battery for extra electric power might take away from the racing itself and become a bit of a distraction for the drivers. It's no secret that drivers don't enjoy a lift and coast driving style, and Max Verstappen made his thoughts clear right before I finished making this video, saying that the new regulations aren't fun as a driver, as he doesn't want to be worrying about battery conservation, and instead wants to have pure racing. He even compared it to being like Formula E on steroids, which was exactly what I've been saying ever since the new regulations were announced. On top of this, he stated that he believes the FIA have taken a step backwards in 2026, although from a viewer's perspective, the racing may still be more exciting than before, even if it isn't from inside the car. Either way though, I'm incredibly excited to see how the 2026 season plays out, and I'll keep you guys updated with new videos about all things F1. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed it. See you next time. Bye!